Hello everybody and welcome to this video. It's the continuation of my series on New Testament studies up to Matthew chapter 14. Please do give the video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel and check out the other videos in the playlist. So we're finished with the parables of Jesus for a bit. We're on to the story of John the Baptist and the feeding of the 5,000. Those are two separate things, I should say. At that time, Herod the Tetrarch heard the reports about Jesus, and he said to his attendants, "This is John the Baptist. He's risen from the dead. That's why miraculous powers are at work in him." Now Herod had arrested John and bound him and put him in prison because of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife. For John had been saying to him, "It's not lawful for you to have her." Herod wanted to kill John, but he was afraid of the people because they considered John a prophet. On Herod's birthday, the daughter of Herodias danced for the guests and pleased Herod so much that he promised with an oath to give her whatever she asked. Prompted by her mother, she said, "Give me here on a platter the head of John the Baptist." The king was distressed, but because of his oaths and his dinner guests, he ordered that her request be granted and had John beheaded in the prison. His head was brought in on a platter and given to the girl, who carried it to her mother. John's disciples came and took his body and buried it. Then they went and told Jesus. This is a pretty famous story. A lot of artwork over the years has been based on it. Here's one example. And it's a story about basically the death of John the Baptist. Now, the last time we saw John the Baptist, he was in prison in Matthew 11. And I talked then about how he was in a very tough time and possibly he was doubting what was going on. You know, he sent his disciples to Jesus to say, "Are you the Messiah?" Which he clearly knew from before. And, you know, it's possible that he was starting to doubt when he was in prison. And here he is now dying. Now, I just want to talk about the historical context here. I had a conversation with my son this morning about the sort of historical and scientific evidence outside of the Bible that proves the Bible to be true. And we see one example here. This story talks about Herod. It talks about Herodias. It talks about the daughter Salome. And these are people that we can look at historical evidence outside of the Bible. And of course, they do show up. There was Herod the Tetrarch. And what had happened was his brother had a wife, Herodias, and Herod wanted her. So Herodias divorced her husband and married Herod. And that was against the law at the time. And, you know, John the Baptist said this is the wrong thing to do, and because of that was thrown into prison. So we know from evidence outside of the Bible that this is a true story about all of the historical characters involved. And to us today, it can look like we're just reading a book of all of these names and how do we know who these people are. But I encourage you to do historical research into the people in the Bible because they are real. And there's so much evidence for the Bible being real. I think a non-Christian might say, "You don't believe all that, do you?" But my answer is yes, I do believe it. And there's a ton of evidence to prove it to be true. You know, little things like when God told Noah to build the ark, the dimensions for the ark are the same dimensions we use for shipbuilding today. They were the perfect shipbuilding dimensions as we now know with all of today's advances, but they were established thousands of years ago. And we have these records in the Bible from thousands of years ago. And what else? In the Old Testament, when Joseph was sold as a slave, the amount he was sold for, we know from historical documents, is the amount that slaves were sold for at the time. When Jesus was pierced in the side with a spear on the cross, what came out? Blood and water. At the time, you might have thought, why is blood and water coming out? That doesn't sound like a true story, but we now know through our studies in medicine that's what happens when you die. The blood and the water separate, and if you were to stab a dead person, water would come out. So there's so many things in the Bible that are historically and scientifically proven today. And so many of the places in the Bible are real places. You can go to them. And, you know, the description of certain places like the Temple Beautiful and how it's described and the amount of pillars and the pool and everything, it's all there. So do not ever accept that criticism that, oh, this is a storybook, because there's so much of it which we can prove with evidence outside of the Bible. But of course, this is a very, very sad story. John the Baptist is now dead, and pointlessly dead. You know, he must have been in prison. If you think about it for a second, he must have been in prison praying and thinking, God, please get me out of here so I can continue working for you. And then what would have happened? The guards would have come to him. He would have said, what's going on? They may have said, you know, wound him up, well, you're for it now, we're going to chop your head off. And you know, there was obviously no sort of trial or kind of a chance to explain anything. You know, it's just horrible. But what it helps us to realize is that what goes on in this world, in this life, in this earth, is not what it's all about. You know, it's easy to think it is, but the reality is we have an eternity in heaven with God, with Jesus. And our eyes need to be on the eternal and on God, because sometimes tough times in life otherwise won't make sense in the smaller picture. If we think of this life as being everything that it's all about, things aren't going to make sense sometimes. But if we see this... Okay, so sorry about that. My phone went off. Yeah, so this is just the warm-up. Anyway, that's all I was thinking. Now, how does Jesus react? So on Herod's birthday, the daughters... did that bit, didn't it? Yeah. When Jesus heard what had happened, he withdrew by boat privately to a solitary place. Hearing of this, the crowds followed him on foot from the towns. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them and healed their sick. Now, how does Jesus react? Jesus withdraws by boat to a solitary place. And often in the Bible, Jesus gets alone with God, goes off by himself to spend time with God, to pray. And it's funny, isn't it? You think, if the Son of God needs so importantly to go off and have time alone with God, then clearly we do, and it should be a priority for us. And what we see here is that he goes off to pray, but people come and follow him. And what happens? He has compassion on them and heals their sick. And I like this because I think it teaches us two things. It teaches us the importance of alone time, of getting alone with God and spending time committing ourselves to God and praying. But it also shows us that we should be flexible. And I don't know about you, but I'm not very flexible in my plans. If my plans are ruined, it really frustrates me. You know, I like to have everything under control. But Jesus here, he sees these people and he doesn't say, go away. You know, I'm going off to pray. I'm disappointed. I'm having a bad day. Go away. He has compassion on them. He puts others' needs before his own. That's a great example to us, isn't it? And what else can we say here? Well, we can also say that later on, after feeding the 5,000, which we'll talk about in next week's video, Jesus then did go and spend his alone time with God. It was a priority, and he made sure it got done, even at the end of what would have been a very long and stressful day. And we should do the same as well. Thanks for watching the video, guys. Please do subscribe to the channel.